Now you are.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Town of Southborough, Massachusetts, meeting of the Personnel Board. This is a virtual meeting via Zoom, Wednesday, October 13th, 2021 at 12 p.m. I'm gaveling us in. It is actually 12:02. We had a bit of technical difficulties, but it's all good now. Vanessa Hale is our Zoom host. Board members present, myself, Ms. Rosenblum, Mr. Malinowski, Mr. Rubenstein, and Mr. Nixon. Ms. Jasinski sends her regrets. She had a family emergency and is out of state. Great. Vanessa, is there anybody else here? Employees?
No employees at the moment. Mr. Semino and Mr. Stivers are in the audience.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Hale. All right, this meeting is being recorded and all votes will be by roll call. All right, the first item on our agenda after call to order is administrative business. A, approval of minutes. You have minutes in your packet at page 1 and 2 for September 22nd, 2021. That was a short meeting. Ms. Hale sent me a correction right before the meeting started. She drew my attention to line 27. It says, the chair noted that the salaries of the new hires were all above midpoint, and that I believe should say minimum. Was that your correction, Ms. Hale?
Yes,
Great.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for spotting that. So I was thinking minimum and wrote midpoint. So I will make that correction. So just to be clear, the salaries we looked at the last meeting were above minimum and were set by Mr. Purple. So I will make that correction. Any other corrections or comments from the board members on the minutes of September 22nd? Thank you. The chair seeing none, the minutes will be, the minutes are approved with that correction. Thanks, everybody. 2B, we have an expenditure ledger in the packet. This is page 3. Any questions on the expenditure ledger? Dated October 5th. Not much to see there. Thank you. All right, moving on to reports. First item is my report. First thing is follow-up from previous meetings. And we had the tuition reimbursement policy and the application. You may recall at our September meeting, we revised that. So this is just to let you know that the revised policy and application were taken care of and they were emailed. And on page 4, you have a copy of my email to the SAP employees. And Ms. Berry has posted the policy and the application on the Personnel Board webpage on the town website. So any questions about tuition reimbursement? So the deadline will be December 31st, and there's nothing further for the board at this time until the applications are received. If the applications are received. All right, B, personnel bylaw. This is something we also discussed what form it would take for the warrant. My understanding is the warrant deadline was October 5th. So you have on page 5 and 6 what I submitted to the Board of Selectmen via Mr. Purple. For the bylaw, it was agreed we weren't going to print the whole bylaw in the warrant for town meeting. And this is what we have. It's at pages 5 and 6. It's the inclusion of the new position of senior IT specialist at grade 7. Any comments or questions on the personnel bylaw for the warrant? Great, thank you. All right, and then finally at Bates pages 7 to 9, the long-awaited chair's list of pending items. And this is our to-do list, which should be read in concert with Ms. Hale's to-do list, which we will look at in a minute. All right, comments, questions on the to-do list? Anybody? All right, I don't know how you want to handle all these items. Some of them we'll take up today, and then maybe we'll take a look at this list again at the end of the meeting. Figure out where you want to go. All right, I turn it over to Ms. Hale for the Assistant Town Administrator's report under 3B. Ms. Hale, you have the floor.
Thank you. In your packet is a memo about staff transitions over the past month. The first item, Kate Battles, is now working part-time in the town clerk's office as an administrative assistant under grade 3. She is not working 19 and a half hours. That position was funded at 19 and a half. She's working, less than that, and her hours may vary a little bit when it's a little bit busier in the clerk's office. So I think he'll be coming to talk to you more about that in the next month or two. She is working there because there was a transition. Karen Garrity is no longer with us, who had been hired to work in the clerk's office. She's moved on. And we have a new part-time dispatcher, Jake Murphy, also a grade 3 employee in the part-time schedule. So that is it for this month.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hale. I would just note, along with what Vanessa said, that Kate Battles, my understanding from speaking with Mr. Hegarty is Ms. Battles is a temporary appointment. And if you look at the preamble of the SAP, it covers temporary SAP positions as well as those that are intended to be more long-term. And we, as Vanessa said, will be hearing from Mr. Hegarty. If you'll note, the starting salary for Ms. Battles at $18.73 per hour is substantially below what the admin assistant, Ms. Garrity, the incumbent, was making. So I imagine we'll be hearing from Mr. Hegarty about that. I think he's in the process of advertising that position. So, but that is a temporary appointment. So thank you, Vanessa. You have the floor again.
Sure. I also wanted to review, as the chair noted, we've been working on our to-do list and cleaning up some items. Do you want me to go through my list now, Ms. Rosenblum, or?
Sure.
Okay.
Or if there's any questions from the board on any, I noted when I went through, so I asked Vanessa to go through the minutes for the last year and make sure she gave us a list of everything that she had either volunteered to do or that we had requested that she do. And I did the same thing as well. And on my chart, I noted if there was something that we had asked her to do. And I note that your list, Vanessa, is not exactly the same as my list. There were some things that I had noted for you that we had asked you to do that did not appear on your list. So maybe we'll go back to my list. The clerk's office copied the packet for me, and they did it on two-sided to save the environment. Very responsible. But it makes me kind of dizzy going back and forth. I'm going to have to break that nasty old habit from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s of putting everything on a single page. All right, so the first thing I had on page, this is page 7, so this is my pending list. Sick leave, Vanessa, and I'm not sure that was on your list. FMLA sick leave policy had been requested from Mr. Norris. You had received it on August 4th, and I don't see that on your list.
I do have number 9 FMLA template for the board on.
Oh, is that
number
it?
9 on
Okay.
my list.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, there it is. So this policy was requested months and is there a reason we don't just get the policy and you have to review?
Well, we just have to fill in some information. It comes to us as a template from one of our attorneys. So it's it wasn't sort of print ready yet, and we just need to fill that in and with all of our particular Southborough information.
Gotcha. Okay. So do you have a date on that when you want to try to get it to the board?
That could definitely be in the board's next packet.
All right. So I'll just note November packet. Great.
Yes.
Thank you for that. All right. So the other thing that I have on my list, something that had been discussed with you and Mr. Purple, was this whole question of who has the authority to hire various employees, who has authority to execute contracts. So would that be number 11, review hiring practices?
It would, because I think that would be done in concert with, finishing up the work we've done on the organizational chart to list who's the appointing authority, who's the, managing authority.
Is org chart on your to-do list, or is that somebody else's to-do list?
No, it is not on my to-do list. I think that was delegated to Mr. Purple.
Okay. So looking at my document on page 7, hiring, authority to hire, authority to execute. The last time we talked about this was August, and you have it on yours on page 11. And I apologize to the board, probably would have been better if I had gotten my pending list together in one document with Vanessa's, but I was on vacation for a week. When I came back, she was on vacation. So we wanted to get you the individual list rather than hold this up. So you have under review hiring practices, schedule October office hours with Attorney Theodorov. I don't know who that
Fedorov.
is.
Her name is Kate Fedorov. She is our new labor counsel with the term of Mead, Tellerman, and Costa.
Mead,
Tallerman.
yeah.
Jay Tallerman is our new town council.
Okay,
And
so you probably told us this. We're no longer with Mr. Norris's firm.
correct. Yep.
And Tallerman is our general counsel as well as our labor counsel.
As well. It's combined into one firm now.
Okay, so any thoughts about just a temporary placeholder on when you might sort that out with the Tallerman law firm about who has authority to hire and who can execute contracts? And again, it relates to the town org chart, but especially if you're having, the last time I spoke with Mr. Purple, he was having your admin assistant, Kate Berry, put that org chart together.
Mhm.
But charting relationships is different than determining relationships. The relationships involve looking at statutes and reviewing legal relationships, then handing it to someone who's talented with software who can chart it for you. Two separate functions. My understanding is you're not asking Miss Berry. You wouldn't be asking Miss Berry
No.
to determine who has authority to hire. You would be giving her data and saying, okay, now put it in a nice chart.
In a pretty format. Yes.
So any timeline for us, something to pencil in on when y'all are going to figure out who hires who and who can do contracts?
I would say for the December meeting, I don't want to commit to the November meeting in case there are scheduling issues with Attorney Fedorov, but we are trying to set up that meeting presently.
Great. All right. And then continuing on my list on page 8, hiring letter. I had as the owners of this task, Mr. Purple and Ms. Hale. This is back in November. This is before Mr. Malinowski was on the board. But we agreed, there were some issues when hiring letters were sent out with SAP terms, and the board was then asked to approve something. So it was resolved that Mr. Purple and or Ms. Hale, whoever was making an offer, would email it to the board in advance to see if there were any issues. And then it occurred to me when I was putting this list together that we have monthly, we receive notice of hires and departures, but we don't see hiring letters. So I wanted to follow up on that. So putting this principle into effect, how will that happen? So that when you continue to send out hire letters, before the offers are made, personnel board would be made aware of what the terms were. And if there's an issue, we would resolve it with a meeting before the offer is made. So
yeah, we were just a little concerned about talking about an offer before it was finalized, before an appointment was made by the Board of Selectmen. So logistically, we just wanted to sort out, would that just go to the chair to review if there was a need for a meeting, or should it go to the full board? Of course, can't reply all and conduct any business through the email as we think about whether or not we need a meeting.
If you look at the minutes of November 18th, this was all kind of fleshed out then, and the full board did want to see the letter, and no one would reply all. Basically, it would come up in the case where you were making an offer, and I don't even think the board particularly cares if you white out the name. You could just cut and paste what
we
the
would.
term
Yeah, that would be
were.
redacted.
But there was a case where you were offering someone advancement in the vacation schedule, and the board took exception to the interpretation. So it's a simple matter that we want to see what's being promised to SAP employees before you hire the person. And then you come to a meeting and you tell us, oh, we hired the person, and we have to say, well, we interpret the SAP and we disagree, this person isn't entitled to XYZ. So, and it was agreed that everybody on the board knows by now, we don't hit reply all. So you'll send us the offer letter and the board members individually reply to me and say, hey, Betsy, I see a problem here. I don't see a problem, no problem. And the issue is only going to come up on things like vacation.
Right.
Okay. So if you want to contact me
good.
first, and I can send an email to the board so you don't have to worry about confidentiality, fine. So whoever is chair can get it. And Mr. Purple recently wrote to me. I had sent out this list of pending matters. Mr. Purple contacted me about this particular thing with reference to a hire they're about to make. I said, hey, if you're uncomfortable sending a letter to the whole board, send it to me. I can remind folks not to hit reply all. But it's really just a way to keep us out of a, somewhat embarrassing situation where the board that's responsible for the SAP doesn't agree with something that's been passed. So
okay, we will have one to you by the end of the day today, in fact.
Oh, great. Wonderful. All right. I also had an item here on, this is page 8, hiring process document. You had given us a memo, same meeting, November 18th, 2020, outlining your hiring process. I was concerned that there was nothing about the hiring process, and what my understanding is you're the de facto hiring manager for many of these positions. You had a document, the board had some questions, and we wanted you to kind of work up a more detailed template for your succession file. And you said you agreed that there could be some supplemental information and you'd keep us informed. So that's the second item on page 8 on my to-do. And I'm not sure if that's included on your list. Would that be rolled into number 11?
Yes, it would be. And it still is on a to-do item. I have not completed that yet.
So if you would roll your process document into that discussion, I understand if you want to understand better what legally you're required to do before you complete that.
Correct.
I personally feel really strongly in succession planning. I know we all like to think nobody's ever going to leave their job, and but the idea that knowledge of how we hire in Southborough is just in someone's head makes me nervous. So a document for the file would be helpful. And again, if any members of the board want to chime in, please just raise your hand. All right. I also had, next item was a job description for executive assistant to the BOS. And Vanessa, I had assigned this to you and Mr. Purple. I don't see this on your list. If you want to speak to that, should that come off the list?
No, it should stay on the list. I see Mr. Purple has joined us now. That's something we are both working on right now since Ms. Esposito has transitioned out of our office. So we're just waiting to get time to review that together and bring that back to the board. I would anticipate that would definitely be at the November meeting.
Okay, but that is not on your to-do list. Is there a reason? Is it under something else?
No, it should have been included with the number 8, the administrative assistant job description.
Okay. And again, my concern on this, folks, and you can see it on my document, is I understand you are interviewing for that position. Again, I'm not a personnel expert, but what I've learned in the last 4 years is the ad for the job starts with the job description. And I remembered that we don't have one that's been updated in place for that position. So I'm not sure. How are you going about advertising and interviewing? Oh, you told us you're going to have a hiring letter for us this afternoon. I presume it's for this position.
Yes.
But what job description is being used?
The one that is in place right now, the older one. So
that includes management responsibility. No, I understand that as part of the Board of Selectmen reorganization, Mr. Purple had revised the job description. And I don't know if you want to speak to this. And you may recall the board was trying to grade it back when Mr. Dietz was on the board. And we couldn't come to a common understanding of how to grade the position because changes were made and we never saw final job descriptions. So you've decided not to revise that position at all and just go with what was there before.
I see Mr. Purple is unmuted. I'll let him answer.
Sure.
Thank you. I think that the understanding right now is that, we're hiring a new person. We're using the existing job description. The skill sets, I think of overall of the office are changing a little bit. And so I'd hate to make some changes to the job description and then decide we may shuffle some tasks and responsibilities amongst the staff sometime in the next 4 to 6 months and then have to come back and change it again. So I think we'd rather wait to see how things settle out before we come back and bring this back up for discussion, because I'm pretty sure it may not look the same.
So you're continuing to reorganize the Board of Selectmen's office? Is this a continuation of what you started 6 months ago, or?
I think it's a little bit different, Madam Chair, in that we reorganize simply to accommodate the administrative assistant position, which was now being shared with the treasurer's office. But we have, trying to figure out how the best way to put this. We've accumulated some additional skill sets with the new administrative assistant position. And I need to determine, exactly what level of skill sets and everything in that we're getting with this additional position, which may mean that we may shuffle the deck on some of the responsibilities. So I don't want to say it's a yes and a no to your question, but it's not the same reasoning as the changes that were made with the administrative assistant position.
I'm confused. So when you say you're accumulating skill sets, do you mean that the person you intend to hire has skills that go beyond what you previously had, or you've determined you have a need for skills? You've learned that you have a need for skills, additional skills. I'm lost there.
I think what I'm delicately trying to say, Barry, is that I have additional skills in the administrative assistant position that did not exist previously. And so I may have the ability to shuffle some responsibilities around. I'm trying to give that position a chance to flesh out with the shared responsibilities between treasurer and selectmen. But I think once the dust settles a little bit on that, we'll have an ability to, maybe shift some of the things between the executive assistant and the administrative assistant position. So rather than making a change right now to the executive assistant job description beyond what's already in place, I think that it would be, better to wait to see if there's some additional changes that we'll be looking to make.
But these skills, are these skills that the person you're looking to hire has, or are these skills that you see someone needing to have? That's what I'm not clear on. You keep talking about these skills, but I don't know, are these skills you're looking for or skills that the person you're hiring or thinking of hiring has? What skills are you talking about? Not specifically the skills, but.
No, I understand. So maybe I've gotten myself into a word vortex here.
Okay.
But the candidate that we are looking at to fill the vacancy has the skill set that the position requires.
Right.
So I guess focusing more on the administrative assistant position and capacity, there may be an ability to shuffle responsibilities that are listed in the job descriptions between the two positions. So I'd rather not make a change now and then bring it back in another 4 to 6 months and make more changes. I'd rather wait to see how this is all going to settle out.
So Mark, I've sorry, Barry, were you done? Sorry.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
So Mark, I guess 2 follow-ups to that, and they're hypothetical, but I think it hopefully will help relieve any confusion on my side. For the candidate that you are looking to hire currently for the executive assistant to the Board of Selectmen, are you at a point today where you can say whether you're hiring that person below the midpoint?
Yes.
Okay.
That
My se-
that is the intention right now, and having not made the offer, that is the intention, and I do believe that indications, from what I know, I'm hoping that we'll be able to get there.
Okay. And my second follow-up to that is, it sounds like obviously a job description is for the position, not to the individual, right? But when you look at an individual to fill a job description, you obviously are making sure that that individual can at least hit the base part of the job description.
Sure.
It sounds like you're in a great position potentially where you have candidates in roles or employees in roles that may be at points that are above what is in their job description in terms of their skill sets, et cetera. Are you planning, at least as current, you can revise this at any point in time, but am I reading between the tea leaves here a little bit that there's a chance between now and the annual town meeting that you may be bringing us job descriptions back that look very different or different? You can include or exclude that word very for both positions in the Board of Selectmen's office that may require regrading.
So I would take out the word very, and I would say no. I don't
Okay.
think I don't think anything that would be adjusted would be something that would be looking for a regrading or a reclassification.
Okay.
I just had a question for either Vanessa or Mark. One of the things we looked at when we looked at the job description for the executive assistant, we had several discussions about what you do with the procurement function. And that was a really important part of the job, was responsibility for procurement. And there was some discussion about whether or not you could change the job title to include deputy procurement officer, Mark being the chief procurement officer, but the executive assistant, at least when it was Ms. Esposito, doing quite a chunk of the procurement. And she did it very well by all accounts, and that was a great benefit to the town. And we had a discussion at this board about whether or not you could change the title. Would you include deputy procurement officer in the title without having to go to town meeting, et cetera, et cetera. But with or without a title change, we talked about the importance of that job responsibility and how that would be stated in the job description. The employee that you're looking to hire, do they have the procurement function? Is that in or out of the current job description? I can't remember. I remember it was in the new revised job description. I can't remember how much it was in the old job description, but given that you're hiring under the old job description, you have it in front of you. Is procurement a big piece of this that you're looking for with the new person?
So it is in the old job description. I think in the revised job description that you had looked at, Madam Chair, I think it was spotlighted a little bit more. And I'm not going to get into the specifics, I think, of the candidates, but I will say that of this candidate pool and the people that were interviewed, they came before me for interviews, everyone has indirect municipal experience, but I don't believe that people have a lot of direct municipal experience for some of the specific things, that the job, is requiring in terms of the procurement, the licensing and things like that. So there is going to be a little bit of a learning curve. There is going to be some training, some MCPPO classes in terms of procurement, some classes in terms of the ABCC for the licensing pieces, but nothing that I would expect that the successful candidate couldn't adapt to fairly quickly.
Is that I'm not sure who did the interviewing. I guess I think of Vanessa as the chief person who manages the applicant tracking system and brings the person in. Although are we still on a freeze with the applicant tracking system, Vanessa? So you're doing this manually. Were you specifically looking for someone with procurement and you didn't find that? Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. Yeah. And we are using Indeed currently, just for that clarification.
Yeah.
we use the free version of Indeed, so there aren't as many options as far as the tracking applicants and skill sets. But yes, we did search, of course, for someone that understood municipal procurement in Massachusetts and Chapter 30B. We did not find anyone that had done a great deal of that.
All right, interesting. Thanks very much. Anybody else on the board have any questions about that? Thank you. So returning just to, I've got Vanessa's to-do list on my left, my to-do list on the right, just finishing up with my to-do list, anything I had put in under Vanessa. And I guess the last thing we've already discussed this is the perennial is the town org chart. So Vanessa, if you could add that to your list, because I think it falls under this whole discussions you're having with town Labor Council. So if you can just put it on in one of these other categories. I guess it falls under, on your list on Bates 11, it falls under item 11 because it's related to hiring. Great. So thank you very much for this list. I think I've pretty much gone through everything on my list that was attached to Vanessa, and we can return to the list to go through the board items. All right. At the conclusion of the meeting, because some of the items on the to-do list we're going to get through now. All right, thanks everybody. Vanessa, were you done with your to-do list and your report?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, old business 4A, we're under fall town meeting. We have Mr. Purple and Ms. Hale with us. Anybody want to give us a quick status of the in-person fall town meeting? It's still a go?
It's still a go. I know that a lot of people, including this board, Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, Advisory, a lot of EDC, a lot of people have put a lot of effort and time into preparing these articles. And I know that the town clerk has put a lot of effort into preparing the space, so to speak, and the gym at Trottier, as well as any potential breakout rooms, the auditorium and the cafeteria as needed, the interconnectivity for those 3 rooms, the spacing, all of those issues to meet the Board of Health needs. So we're still on for November 1st. It's still 10 articles. The Board of Selectmen took positions on the articles. They voted to support all of them, with the exception of one at town meeting for the budget, for some of the budget adjustments, which some members said they wanted a little bit more time with. Advisory took no positions at this point, so the printed warrant has all of their positions as at town meeting. I know that they are meeting this evening and we'll be getting some additional information and meeting with some additional boards or committees, article sponsors to try to get information to allow them to generate opinions of support or not support for the articles. So everything is moving forward. 7 o'clock, Trottier Gymnasium, Monday, November 1st. And that's really what I have for an update right now.
Thank you, Mr. Purple. Any questions from the board on that? All right. A2 presentation. I am planning to be there. I am not planning to spend money on photocopies for any sort of explanation. I plan to stand up, tell folks who I am, and tell them that included in the SAP for their review and approval is a position of senior IT manager. And you may recall when we discussed this position, we got into the debate about whether or not it is the job of the personnel board to do a cost benefit economic analysis. The board was split on that. I don't think we've ever reviewed it. So I would not represent to town meeting that we've done an economic analysis, just simply that we have reviewed documentation and arguments from proponents for the position. And they have given us satisfactory supporting documentation. So I'm not going to make an argument to people at the fall town meeting that this position is warranted on its substance. Does that make sense? I think that's kind of where this board fell out, still having an ongoing debate about what is the role of this board. So
But
with,
Betsy, I think it's important that role is already funded, and it's been funded since July 1st town
for
meeting
1 year.
for 1 year. Yep, obviously
Yeah.
subject to BOS advisory and town meeting votes every year, but
So what I would do, Jason, thank you for that point, Mr. Malinowski, I would step aside and let the proponents of this position, Mr. Purple, if he wants to call it Mr. Montijo, but I don't see it, given in the past, I thought it was my job to convince people at town meeting, and we had included an economic analysis in our argument, and I've brought that up many times. We didn't do that this time. This board has evolved. We didn't get into a discussion of cost benefit. We got into a discussion of what was, excuse me, put in front of us, and I think it would be best left for the folks that are advocating for the positions. I don't want there to be any surprises. I will not be able to advocate for this on a cost benefit fiscal basis. I will tell the board what was brought before us, and I'm not even sure that we ever saw, we discussed external comps. I remember a discussion about how difficult it was to put a salary on this position because different towns call this different things. That the position as envisioned for Southborough is a combination of help desk, but also a combination of manager nights and weekends. It combines different aspects. It's not the redundant man in all respects, but it has elements of that. So what I would do if there are questions about this, I would cede the floor to Mr. Purple. If he wants to bring up Mr. Montijo, the Municipal Technology Committee. But I'm here to say that we did our due diligence as we saw it under the SAP. Evidence was brought to us, I think it's called substantiating documentation. The fact that it's funded for 1 year, I personally don't know what to do with that information. That may be relevant to some folks. In terms of putting a job in the SAP, my feeling is that funded for 1 year, well, I'll let everybody draw their own conclusion about what that
yeah,
means.
Betsy, I was just
Yeah.
putting, I think it's technically backwards, right? It's already been funded without obviously the job. So
Yeah.
I think I'm completely on board with you. I don't think personnel, at least my personal view is, I don't think personnel board should be advocating for a position. Our job is to help find where it fits in the SAP. And I think that's what you've done. And I think less is more here. In just listening to the discussion at BOS in advisory last week in their joint meeting, there's very little discussion about this. So that's why I'm advocating less seems to be more. I think the discussion already happened last spring.
As usual, Mr. Malinowski, you succinctly put your finger on it. Our job was to maintain the integrity of the SAP and put it in its proper place. And I feel that we discharged our mission. So I didn't want there to be a surprise that I may step aside if there are questions about the funding and whatnot. So anybody else have any questions? Everybody planning to attend town meeting? All right, it'll be nice to see you there, and I plan to be there. All right. Number 3, under fall town meeting, this is something Mr. Malinowski had asked me to put on our agenda. In the event that for whatever reason being pandemic, if the fall town meeting were to be canceled, what are the options for the senior IT position under the existing bylaw? That is, if we don't have an opportunity to present this revision to town meeting. So I open that up. I don't know if you want to speak on this, Mr. Malinowski.
Based on Mr. Purple's update, I would propose that we table this until November and cross our fingers that things continue as planned.
All right, is that acceptable to the board? All right,
Yep.
Sounds good. Will do. All right. Under old business, we are on B. This would be FY23 bylaw and Springtown meeting, looking ahead. So there's documentation in your packet starting at page 13. So this relates to the board's decision after much discussion over a period of years and changing the process and reviewing the results of the process, our decision this summer that we would no longer review performance evaluations. And I won't summarize that. It's in the minutes if anyone wants to go back and look at the basis for that decision. So what we were left with was making a change to the bylaw at section 7A. The bylaw currently reads that SAP employees don't get a raise unless we see a performance evaluation. And we're going to change that to be a certificate. We're not getting rid of the requirement that managers do a performance evaluation, just that we're not going to see it. We're going to see a certification. And I can't remember if Mr. Rubenstein volunteered to be on this subcommittee or if I volunteered him.
Well, it turned out he didn't do any of the work. So.
In any event, the minutes reflect that Barry and I volunteered to get something to the board. And so you have a memo on page 12, one of my usual memos. I do this as much for you guys as for myself because I don't remember anything from 4 months ago. So typical fashion, I go back, I look at the minutes. What did we say we needed to do? What did we do? What's our due diligence and where are we? And where we're at is page 13, Bates 13. This is the current text of paragraph 7. And I've highlighted the language that needs to change. And my suggested revision is printed here. And there's been a lot of discussion through the years about personnel, trying to pull some of this detail out of the SAP, so changes don't need to be approved at town meeting on an annual basis or even a semi-annual basis. I think this is the first time we are having a fall town meeting during my tenure. So it's always been that the SAP needs to be changed on an annual basis. So wouldn't it be nice if there was a policy and we could change that, you know, and the board changes. So my proposal would be that we say requests for salary increases must be accompanied by a certification, and the form of the certification will be prescribed by a policy. And I did that rather than putting in the details of what the certification would say, because board members change and the board might decide to change. So a policy says, this year we require this. A future board might require something else. And then you have the text of the policy on page 14, that's attachment B. And again, this is just a draft policy. And then you have a draft template of what this certification would look like. And basically, I took the current performance evaluation cover sheet and said, okay, what are we asking folks to put down? And you'll see it's reprinted in the certificate and then the manager's certification. And lastly, I looked through all the policies. I described this in my memo and said what I think we need to do with them. So questions, comments? Again, this is just, it's always easier for the board to have something in front of them to throw darts at. So start throwing.
First, I do want to make clear, again, this is all of Betsy's work. I didn't contribute anything to it. And I thank you for doing all of that.
Your spirit was guiding me, Barry. The spirit of reason is always guiding me. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and I think I agree with all of it. You know, I could wordsmith a little bit on the certification. I would like to make clear in bullet point 1 that it's an evaluation on the form prescribed by the personnel board, so that they can't just put something together. And I had a question about bullet point 2. What policies are there in departments with regard to personnel performance evaluations that would depart from whatever we say? I guess I'm not familiar with what those are or what you were thinking of there.
What I was thinking of was that if we're getting out of the business of reviewing evaluations, I propose that we also get out of the business of prescribing a format for the evaluation, because we're not going to see it. This form has evolved based on our needs. But again, I'm open. So would you change the bylaw itself to say a performance evaluation in a form approved by the personnel board? You want that back in the bylaw?
I think we want some uniformity. We want everybody using the same document, and unless we're the ones who sign off on it, I'm not sure. I guess we could just have Mark. I'm sure Mark wants to get back in the business of redesigning performance evaluation forms. So, I mean, I'm hopeful that this isn't going to be an annual process, that we have a form. We're going to stick with that form unless Mark or someone comes forward and says, doesn't work, we need to change it. But I think there has to, or my preference is that there be one form that everybody is using. Others may disagree.
I agree with Barry. There may be some
Excuse me
parts.
for 1 minute. I'm just going to pop up and get a glass of water. My allergies are terrible and I'm about to stop. I'll be back in 30 seconds. Keep talking. I can hear you.
Talk amongst ourselves.
Barry, I completely agree with you. I think there may be some departments that have not applicable in certain sections, depending upon the form, but I do think, right, each department head naturally has different experience evaluating personnel and numbers of employees. So I think if you give them some template as opposed to making it, I don't want to call it a free-for-all, but giving too much judgment, it may divert too much from what you're trying to fix and create other unintended consequences.
Mr. Nixon, did you wish to opine on whether or not we should require the form?
I agree with Barry's observations.
All right. I'm sorry, Ms. Jasinski is not here. I don't know what her position would be, but it would sure to be a strong one. So, all right. So on Bates, page 13, the revision to the third paragraph of section 7 would now say requests for salary increases must be accompanied by a certification from the employee's manager that the employees, you want me to add a clause that says a performance evaluation. Oh, and that a written employee performance evaluation has been completed in a form approved by the personnel board?
Yeah, I would put that after evaluation. So employee performance evaluation on a form, whatever the language, on a form approved by the personnel board has been completed.
Approved by the PB, comma, has been completed. Got it. And then looking over at the policy, would have to add that to the third bullet point in a format approved. And then on the manager certification, I would take out the second bullet point, so we're no longer going to have it, and it would also say form approved by personnel.
Right.
Okay. So if everybody's good with that, I'll revise that and put it in front of you at the next meeting. And then we could vote to rescind the existing policies. And the only policy, so we're going to rescind earlier policy on salary adjustments. That's at Bates 16. We're going to rescind the policy on 17, and we're going to roll the policy on page 18 on the eligibility of new employees for salary increases would not change, in my estimation. Because that just has to do with the timing of when you can get a raise. It doesn't have to do with us seeing. So the two policies would rescind had to do with us seeing evaluations.
Can
Any
I ask a
questions?
question? Yeah.
Yes, please.
The items that you're proposing to rescind, that would only be after annual town meeting if this language were to pass. Is that correct? So
Yes.
it would theoretically be effective, the rescission would be effective 7/1 of 22.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So I'll revise these and get them to the board for the next meeting. Okay, great.
Are we
Thank you
gonna
all.
vote, Betsy, are we gonna vote on what's on Bates 14 at the next meeting too, which would be the new policy? Or when are we gonna discuss that?
I thought we just had, but please, if there's more discussion.
I was focused on Bates 13, which was what we were actually gonna put in the SAP, but
Sure. Let's
under-
take a look at 14 then, because to my mind, it's a packet.
yeah,
So-
so overall, I think this is, there was one question I had in particular under no performance evaluation or certificate is required for the following employees.
Yeah,
was-
that's, Jason, that was the policy on page 17 that combined us seeing evaluations and certain exemptions.
I
So,
completely agree with what's in there now. My question is actually along the lines of, did anyone ever consult with the fire chief about his employees that have a special schedule in the SAP? Because I would think, subject to him weighing in, that may be another exemption for consideration in this policy for two reasons. One, the type of work that they're performing as call firefighters, they're not on regular shifts, they don't have administrative duties, et cetera. And two, the provisions that exist under the strong fire chief law in Massachusetts, which the town has adopted in some form for many years. I would suggest we consult with him on how he currently or would, under this policy, actually do performance evaluations for his call firefighters,
okay,
and see and just get him to weigh in. I'm happy to facilitate that discussion, but I think it's something that should be considered as part of the overall policy here. I'm totally fine with everything else that's written currently.
thank you, Mr. Malinowski. I have no current memory of whether or not I had a discussion with our fire chief. I have a current memory of having a discussion with our police chief about part-time dispatchers, because they fell into the category of maybe don't need. And my discussion with Chief Paulus is that he preferred to do performance evaluations and keep them in the SAP. Sometimes I talk to the two of them as if I send the same email to both, so I can't, but I do not have a present recollection of having had that conversation. So I'm happy to have it, or you can have it and reconsider adding
I'm
it.
indifferent on who has it. If I have it to do, let me know. If you want more background, I think there's a fundamental difference between a part-time dispatcher and a call firefighter, and there's different powers that each chief actually has in operationally running their departments that should be considered.
I have no problem, given your knowledge of the fire department and relationship with the chief, if you want to have that discussion. And then why don't you speak to me and I can incorporate it in whatever I put together for the board for November.
Okay, and depending on where it comes out, I'll see if he'll submit something in writing, one way or
Right.
another.
I just think it makes sense to not give this board two different proposals. If I am revising the policy on page 14, love to hear what you have to say. If you want to put something in writing, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you, and thanks for doing that, and thanks for bringing it up. Anybody else have anything? Yeah, so the policy on page 14 kind of rolled in the provisions of existing policy that we want to keep while rescinding the existing policies on receipt of that have to do, the parts that have to do with us looking at performance evaluations. So B would be a new catch-all policy. All right. And that begs the question, if we decide in November, December that we're moving forward with this, what do we do for this year's reviews that are coming due? Because this change won't be effective until July 1st, but we should know in March whether or not town meeting has approved it. So do we want to act as if it is effective? Do we want to see what happens? I mean, we can table this discussion, how we want to handle what happens after town meeting before any new policy would take effect. I can't imagine a town meeting having a problem with it, but you never know. It's like a jury. Someone could stand up and say, I want my personnel board to review 162 performance evaluations. That's your job. So who knows? So maybe we can table that discussion, but just something for the back of your mind. All right. Any other board members have any comments or questions on 4B? Otherwise, we will move on. Thank you. Anything from our administrators when you reviewed this? Because of the vacation schedule, I did not have a chance to talk to Mark and Vanessa about any of this, so feel free to chime in. All right, I don't see anything from them. We are on 4C, Section 11 Benefits Review. All right, as promised, I have a report in the packet that starts at page 19. I won't repeat it. Any comments or questions on the gathering of the data for the Section 11 Benefits Review? And I do have one, and that's my footnote on page 20. I did not have a chance to talk to Ms. Hale. So there were two questions that were posed. One was actually a set of questions, and the first question, Q1. So I put in my footnote on page 20. So Vanessa, I'll let you speak to this. You had left off the Q1 in your original request, and then you followed up with Q1 later.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
And you told me at one point, September, that you had not sent Q1 to everybody on your listserv, only to the municipal officials that have responded to the first question, which was actually Q2, or what we're calling Q2. But when you reported on your Excel spreadsheet, and thank you to you and Katie. So this is page 25 and 24 and 25 of the packet are all the towns Ms. Hale got responses from on full-time, part-time. You had some 50 plus communities, which is way more than, or 47, I think, which is more than responded to Q2. So I didn't really entirely understand if the Q1 response was only to communities that responded to Q2, then Q1 responses should be limited to the 28 communities that answered Q2 or some subset of it.
Yeah.
And you have way more. So if you want to speak to that.
Of course. It's a little bit of both, actually. Originally, the question went back to the people that had responded to the initial query. But then again, at the end of September, I think we talked about this immediately before you may have gone on vacation. I said, the responses that came in over the summer can, some be often sporadic with people on vacation or delegating it to someone else to answer. So I sent it out again on the 29th, the 28th, and it did go to the full listserv. So that is why there is a greater number of people on the chart that Katie and I sent to you on October 4th.
Terrific. That answers that question. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So we have 47 respondents on Q1. We had, by my count, 28 responses to the more detailed question, what is your vacation policy? What's your sick leave policy? And I have these in two forms. One was an original group of folks that responded to Vanessa, and she took their emails and she cut and pasted them into a document for me. That's on 623 summary. And then subsequently, some of those folks referred, they might have answered by saying, here's our policy, see the attachment. And in some cases, she cut and pasted those, but in some cases they were lengthy and she ended up sending me emails with links. So I would have the live link. So there's two forms of data. Some are cut and pasted in a document. Some were attached. Actually, there's three. There's the original cut and paste summary from June. Then there are the follow-up emails with the links that she sent me. And then there are additional communities that answered after June 23rd. So what I am in the midst of doing is trying to roll this all into one document. I've printed everything Vanessa gave me. I am now cutting and pasting it all into one document. What makes it a lengthy process is it's not like you're asking people one question with Q2. Everybody's got a different policy. It's got a little nuance. Some folks didn't directly answer the question. I mean, they answered it, but they didn't fully answer it. And it's not like with the Q1, which is what's your policy, full-time, part-time, give us a number, great, we throw it in a table. These are all over the place. It's not like I can put them into one table for everybody. And I could potentially use a little help with this. And I can continue to work on what I have. And at the November meeting, I will give you everything I have. And then maybe somebody can help me kind of organize it. Not organize it, put it into a coherent form. So I will take all the data that we have from Ms. Hale, put it in one place, and then you can see it. But from there, we're going to have to try to put it into some kind of coherent, I'm not even coherent about what we need to do. Extrapolate from that some sort of, you know, where the towns are with it. And the first question is, before we spend too much time with it, if you would look at Bates page 23. So these are the towns I'm talking about. You can see they responded with their sick and vacation policies. Some of them may not be towns that we want to spend a lot of time with. For example, number 4, Chelmsford is a city. Is it a city of Chelmsford?
A large town.
A large town. Thank you. And they simply sent Vanessa links to all their different policies. So before I start reading those, cutting and pasting those, is this a town that we want to spend time with? So that's my first question. And towards that end of determining if we're going to have a specific focus or if we want to look at everything, Bates, page 22, this is the GovHR list of comparable communities. And we've discussed this before. This has appeared in the GovHR studies that they've done for us. So when we got the first group of responses back in June, the first thing we discussed, Dorian and myself discussed with Vanessa, was we really want to try to get the data from communities that our paid consultant had already determined were comparables. So she, Ms. Hale, contacted them again. And you can see on page 23, my summary, I highlighted any community that was considered a comparable. And we got responses from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 of those responding were from the comparables list, but there's still quite a few more that aren't. So before we ask Vanessa to go back, spend more time, get more data, study policies, I wanted to get a sense of the board. If you have a feeling about targeting the comparable communities, if you want to see policies from anybody. And again, on page 23, Appendix C, these communities are all under 50,000. That was the question Vanessa sent out. The full-time, part-time Q1 was to anybody, but the vacation sick leave was targeted at smaller communities, 50,000 and less. So now that you know what's come in, you have the list of comparables, want to get a sense of the board. Again, I'm happy to summarize, put together in one place everything we've received so far, but there's going to be a lot of documentation there. So.
I mean,
Yes, Mr. Malinowski, anybody.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Jason.
Go ahead, Barry.
I was just going to say I'd be comfortable using our list of comparables. I mean, typically, I would think someone applying for a job here would be applying for jobs in those communities. They're not going to be applying for a job in Pittsfield or Provincetown or some of the others that are listed here. And part of the consideration as we evaluate this is from a competitive standpoint. Are we too generous, not generous enough, that kind of thing. So, and at some point you get too much data that we can't process it. So I'd be comfortable with just sticking with the comparable communities.
Thank you, Mr. Rubenstein. Mr. Malinowski?
Second, what Barry said, I see absolutely looking at this list, there's no reason to deviate from this list. This is clearly the communities that I think we get benchmarked against in probably take employees from and lose employees too, sometimes as well. I want to simplify the process because I am, as Betsy noted, I was a member of advisory that brought this forward to personnel board before sitting here. A lot of the questions that went out to the listserv, I don't know if those were to serve other needs, but were not the focus of what advisory was looking for personnel board to do. It may have caused, candidly, a distraction to those responding to the listserv. Now, I realize that if we look at this list of comparable communities, there's probably 20, however many this number adds up to, there's probably a different number of policies in each one. What I would recommend we do is, starting with Ashland and working our way down to Westwood, just go to the town's website. And if they have a personnel board or a version of a personnel board, just cut and paste from their policy that's posted on their website. That's what I did to bring this to advisory because I knew there was an issue. From advisory to personnel. Like I already sampled some of these communities and saw a disconnect, which is why we referred the matter in the first place. So I would try to go to these communities' websites, of which I probably already have some of the data from the initial inquiry a year ago. And I'm happy to work with someone to paste what I have to date into that spreadsheet. And my guess is we're going to be listed with like 5 or 6 towns that don't have great websites that Mark or Vanessa likely have a contact with, whether it be like, for example, the Northborough town administrator. I would imagine Mark talks to that gentleman a lot, given all the, right? And a lot of these are neighboring communities or one out from our neighboring communities. So I think we can get the data without having to go back and forth 200 times. And Betsy, I'm trying to save you time too. So I would just suggest we start with someone just going and grabbing the personnel policies for these towns and putting them in one spot. And then grab the full thing, right? Like PDF it and put it in a share. Like, I don't know, Betsy, if we may navigate towards a OneDrive sort of thing that some of the other departments are using. That way, when matter B gets brought forward this year that we don't even know about, someone's not going back out to these websites. Now, I get personnel plans change every year, but I'd say if we can have someone on Mark's team grab the personnel policies, I'm happy to then go in and pull out the pieces that I know we're looking for this exercise. But then we have a central register of what it is if there's other matters that come up. And then we leverage Mark, Vanessa, or anyone else to go out to the remaining stragglers and figure out what the data is, or maybe they don't have a policy on this. It'd be surprising, but I mean, there's always a chance.
Great. Thanks for that guidance. Dave, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree with with sticking with Appendix B, the list of communities there, because on this other list that we have, looking at areas like Arlington, Braintree, population 40,000, whether they be a city or a large town, is not a valid comparison.
Thank you all, gentlemen. Just to be clear, the only broad swath that we did for Appendix A was just on how do you define full-time, part-time? Because we knew that would be easy to summarize. So that was why we went broader with that. Mr. Malinowski, I love your idea. So, and thank you all, gentlemen. Sounds good. Thanks for that direction. So what I would propose is, and I do have a note for you, on my list, Appendix C, a couple of the towns that are listed there, I didn't shade them, but I'm cross-referencing the comps with the list of communities that responded. And number 13, Northborough, that should have been shaded. That's one of our comparables. And number 21, Sudbury. So looking at the list of comps, we didn't hear from Ashland, Auburn, Grafton, Holliston, Littleton, Maynard, Medfield. So Vanessa, I would ask you, can we task you with some of this?
Or I'll take
Okay.
care of that.
So to summarize what the gentlemen have recommended, and it makes perfect sense to me, let's set up a OneDrive folder like we did
Yeah.
for performance
For
evaluation.
reviews, yes.
Send out a link. Please deposit. You should have policies already in your possession on Concord, Hopkinton, Medway, Northborough, Sudbury, Wayland, Westboro, and Westwood. Those are all the comps that you previously have gotten emails from. Do a data dump into the OneDrive and do a follow-up request for the comparable communities that you didn't get a reply for. Oh, you don't, sorry, no request. Just go on their website,
Yeah.
pull it out. That's Ashland, Auburn, Grafton, Holliston, Littleton, Maynard, Medfield are the only ones. Throw it all in a OneDrive. If you want to do separate folders by town, if that's easier for you, and then share the link. That'd be great.
Yep.
All right. And where they had given us a response and they linked us to a policy, please put that information in PDF form. One of the things I noticed when you cut and paste tables, so the summary you had given me in June, that cut and pasted a table from somewhere, I don't remember where. And when I went back to the primary source material, lines had gotten cut off from the table. That's nobody's fault. That happens when you cut and paste. So I think the best way is what Jason said, just go to the website. Don't rely on an email. Pull up what's there. Put a PDF into a folder and we can all do some
Okay.
homework. Did I get that straight, gentlemen? Great.
Sounds good.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Hale. I don't think the data on full-time, part-time is wasted, but this will help me get through this faster if I'm not summarizing policies from Pittsfield, Raynham, and Sandwich. So great. Anything else on this? Anything else anybody else wants to see? All right. Thank you for that. All right. We are moving on to 4D. We have a couple of legal items Vanessa sent to me. I guess we've already done D2, the follow-up on discussions regarding hiring authority and contracts. That is tabled to, was that November or December when you were going to have a report from new Tallerman Council?
I believe December.
December. Okay. So D2 is tabled to December, and we have D1, which is some hiring guidelines from the new Labor Council. Those are in your packet, starting at page 26. These were supplied by Ms. Hale. I'll let her explain what she has given you. Vanessa, you have the floor.
Sure, thank you. So based on the board's conversations a number of months ago, we wanted to just get some guidance, updated guidance on interviewing questions, what's appropriate and what is not. We had a document rather many years ago that came from Russ Milholland when he was a board member. He often guided a lot of our interview panels and search committees. It was fairly outdated, so I went back to Attorney Norris, who at the time was serving as our labor counsel, to ask him for any templates that he might have in this area. Unfortunately, it took us many months to get that, but this is the material that was received from him.
So the document starting on Bates, page 26, is just the Code of Massachusetts regulations. So are you saying this data is not known to the people that hire in Southborough until a lawyer sent it to us? CMR, which is abbreviation for the Code of Massachusetts regulations. This is not something we had in-house. I'm just trying to understand.
Sure, not in any kind of policy or packet, no.
Okay, so we don't have 804 CMR 3.02 is not sitting in your office. It's
No, it's probably somewhere in the town administrator's office, but as a separate attachment, no.
okay, great. So now will this change your process when you hire? Was this information all known to you, or how will this affect your practices?
No, it was primarily no, but I think it is a good idea to share a document like this again with at least the chairs of our boards and committees, because the ones that are there have appointing authority and sort of purview of doing hiring themselves as elected boards. That changes from time to time, and we never know what kind of experience those folks may have had in interviewing or hiring on their own. So I think it's a great time to send that out again to our board chairs and give them a refresher on this.
Great. So if I were seeing this document and I didn't know that my board had requested it, I wouldn't know why I was getting it. When you sent it out to all the board chairs, did it have a little intro like, here's updated guidance from our Labor Council?
So that has not occurred as yet. That was my suggestion, that at this point, it would be a good time to distribute this to board chairmen with a cover memo explaining why we're sending this out to them.
So I'll receive this again. I received this because I'm chair of
Yes.
personnel board and we asked for it. I think it was
Yes.
Mr. Rubenstein. So you're going to be forwarding this to all committees?
Correct.
Okay, with an intro. So I'll see it
Correct.
again as the chair. I'll see it again with your.
You
intro.
will.
Okay, when you send this out, are you going to distinguish between those public bodies, boards and committees that do hiring, or are you just going to send it to everybody?
I think it's beneficial to send it to everyone.
Okay, we don't have employees, we don't hire, but we'll get it anyway.
Right.
Okay, great. And there's.
I have a slightly different opinion on that.
Okay.
I mean, you only have a few, right? I could probably count on one hand the number of boards or committees that have hiring authority. Do I have that wrong?
Jason, that is one of the $64,000 questions that Barry and I were pursuing with Mr. Purple and Ms. Hale and Mr. Ballantyne this summer. And we were told something that, I don't know if you were on the board at the time I reported this, you may have just been brand new. We had been told that all boards and committees with employees have authority to hire them. And that was not something we had been told before. And this is something that is under review. So I don't know at this point.
Okay. I was just thinking about it as, like you said, you're going to get it as chair of personnel board. I'm going to get it as chair of a different committee. Dave will get his chair of another committee. Barry gets his chair of another committee. I think you're going to create mass confusion for some committees that absolutely have no role in this. Was just my feedback, but I understand why you're suggesting it. I would say before this goes out, though, Ms. Hale knows about all ongoing hiring processes. I think it's important that Ms. Hale and Mr. Purple be aware of those processes, even if they don't have any say in who gets chosen, that they are reminding people and keeping this document current, because I imagine it changes on the fly. So, for example, we heard the town clerk is doing something with his department. Obviously, that's his decision, and he is the appointing authority. How is he getting updated on these sorts of things? Because he's not a board or a committee. He's just an elected official.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jason, and I think and I don't know what the process is for those boards that do hire, what notice you do get in advance, but I think as soon as you get notice that someone is going to be in the hiring process, you should send this out to them just as a reminder because, people will get it now and may hire 3 years from now. And, who knows what they remember, what they don't remember. But I think people need to be reminded as they start the process, what sort of the do's and don'ts are.
Mhm.
It's not clear to me after a series of meetings and discussions that I had, and Mr. Rubenstein, you were party to one of them, who hires. I mean, I recall hearing about a debate a couple years ago when they were hiring a new rec director, and the rec commission said, we have authority to hire. And I understood Mr. Purple to say, I have authority to hire. And now we're hearing that all the boards and committees who have a statute authorizing that. What I was told most recently was all boards and committees that exist by law, so they have a statute, rec commission, council on aging, have a statute that allows them to exist. they all have hiring authority. And that was not something I had previously understood. I had understood that committees, well, anyway, I had understood that there could be public bodies, boards and committees and commissions, such as the Council on Aging and Recreation Commission, but that the Board of Selectmen maintained that they had hiring authority. And I know that the Board of Selectmen still has to authorize those appointments. So it's a little confused to me. That was the purpose of the series of meetings that we had. And I'm still awaiting clarity from the conversations that Ms. Hale alluded to that she will be having, or Mr. Purple will be having, or they will both be having with our new town labor council. So I agree, this should go to folks that do hiring. And I think there's some 60 odd committees in town, most of whom do not have employees. And to send it to 60 odd committees instead of sending it to the 5 that hire, maybe it makes sense to take a look at your list and just send it to the boards and committees that I agree with the gentleman that have employees. And it's going to cut down. That's just my suggestion. We don't have jurisdiction over what the Board of Select. You're acting as an agent, not for us, but for the executive of the town. You may want to not send that to everybody. If I get it, I know enough to know that it's not for, anything I need to. So I just wanted to say, while we're looking at this topic, there is a second document that Ms. Hale supplied us on page 30 in your packet. That is the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination Pre-Employment Inquiry Fact Sheet. And did you want to speak to us on this? It's a 2-page document, dates 30 and 31. Was this also forwarded by the new Labor Council?
No, this came from Attorney Norris.
Okay, so we have the CMR came from Mr. Norris's firm, and this MCAD.
Both did. Yeah.
Is this, do they overlap? What, tell us what you understand this to be and what you want us to know about it.
Sure. No, I think they do overlap in some areas. It's really, guidance on, what is appropriate and what isn't. And it, gives some examples of, how to phrase questions and so forth. So, it's more of a guideline for people conducting interviews.
Does it reference back to 804 CMR?
It does.
302? Okay.
Yes, it does.
I guess, being an attorney, I can deal with all this, but it's kind of a lot of data. And I'm just wondering, does this get distilled down into one guidance from the town? Or do you just expect anyone, like, let's take Mr. Hegarty. We don't want to pick on him, but he's a elected board who hires. Maybe Board of Assessors is another one. You would just hand them these 6 or 7 pages or 5 or 6 pages and say, hey, here's what you're supposed to do, or?
That occurred certainly many years ago. I am not involved in the recruitment for any of the town clerk employees, so I can't speak to that.
I mean, my preference, and I've worked with both of these, is the MCAD one. I think is easier for most people to understand. It's 2 pages. From my perspective, I'd be content if people saw that document.
So Barry, they overlap enough that if I just read Bates page 30 and 31, I'd know what I'm supposed to know?
Yeah.
Did Mr. Norris give any guidance with these, Ms. Hale?
He did not.
Okay. All right. Was it your plan to speak with Tallerman firm, your new labor council, before you send these out, or just send them out and say these were from previous labor council?
It could certainly go either way. I don't know if Mr. Purple thinks that we should wait until we meet with Attorney Fedorov, or I defer to him here.
I think it's probably a good idea to have a conversation with Attorney Fedorov, but I do want to point out that the majority of the appointing authorities outside of the Board of Selectmen do work through Ms. Hale for the hiring processes. So it's not like you've got all these different appointing authorities who are going off on their own and you know, handling their own processes, and we have to be concerned about how they got to their final product and their final candidates and that. So, you know, there are a limited number. I mean, town clerk, he does his own hiring processes, and, you know, if he wants to, that's fine. But there are a number of other elected, you know, boards or departments that do their hiring processes and that do allow Ms. Hale to run point and help to coordinate those.
Yeah, I think we just I want to be comfortable that anybody who's interacting with applicants knows what they can and can't say to them, so that they don't inadvertently ask a question that gets us in trouble.
The last thing you want to do, Barry, is have a candidate ask a question, and the next thing you do is you might as well offer them the position. You know, you put yourself in a real position. So, nope, I completely agree with that.
So in the past, has this kind of guidance gone out from the Board of Selectmen to, because I've never asked well, actually, I did have a conversation with Mr. Hegarty about hiring, and he told me that when he needed to hire for a position, he asked Ms. Hale for what contract they use. So there has been coordination with the town clerk's office asking for assistance. I can't imagine any responsible town official, and I put Mr. Hegarty in that category, or the Board of Assessors, or all of them, who would turn down advice on what is legal and what isn't legal. So have we sent that out in the last decade, Vanessa, or has this been
Probably early in the decade,
okay?
but not for several years. So it's a good time for a refresher.
Okay, and if I understood Mr. Purple, you're going to wait and review this with Attorney Fedorov in, is that meeting in October or November, your labor review with her?
It is not set up yet. We're working on a date.
Okay, so you'll give us a follow-up on that after it's done. Because based on this discussion, you may not send me these guidelines, because I may not need to see them. All right, are there any other questions from the board members on these legal guidelines? And thanks again, Barry, for your expertise. Always appreciated. All right, we have a bit of new business in our packet. We are on 5A, annual salary adjustment for SAP employees. And we have some documentation in the packet. It's a template at page 32, Bates 32. This is sort of the evolution of the board over the last few years, the types of data that we ask for. I sent this questionnaire out to our team at Town Hall, and that is Mr. Ballantyne, Mr. Purple, and Ms. Hale. And subsequently, I did get an email from the town accountant saying, hey, folks, have you thought about the annual adjustment? And I was able to tell Ms. McAuliffe that, yes, I had. Great minds think alike. I emailed her back and told her and sent her a copy of this as well. So I guess she should be on the team as well. And don't have anything else on annual adjustments. So I'll open it up to Mr. Purple and Ms. Hale.
I think I'll defer to Ms. Hale on this, at least to let her start.
Thank you, Mr. Purple.
Sure. It is a little bit early in the year to get a defined answer from our comp communities on what they're offering. You know, they're in the same place we are, just starting their budget development. I'm happy to go out and ask them all that now, but as I know from past years, making that inquiry, you know, or October, November is a little bit early to get 100% response from them.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. So what I should have added is that the town accountant, Ms. McAuliffe, emailed me to see if the board was considering setting the annual adjustment before departmental budgets are due, because that makes sense from an accounting point of view, that the cost of labor increase would be known to the departments when they are formulating their budgets. And if you move forward, after the packet was filed, I received a few budget documents from Mr. Ballantyne. So they don't have a number. Those were a couple of documents. It's the budget calendar and a copy of the Personnel Board budget. It was 3 pages. Does everybody have that? A memo from Mr. Valentine dated October 6th, 2021. It's the budget calendar in bold letters. You must submit budgets, capital. Oh, sorry, this was for the budget calendar. Yeah, Friday, November 12th, 2021 is the budget deadline. So we have the town accountant's request that we set the annual adjustment and tell folks what the labor increase is going to be for FY21, and they have to factor that into their budget for November 12th. But we have no data at present. We would be pulling our adjustment out of a hat at this point. So, and our next meeting is after the budgets are due. Oh no, our next meeting is scheduled for November 17th. I have us on the calendar as a meeting. And budgets are due on Friday the 12th. So I'm not sure it's reasonable that this board, I appreciate Ms. Hale's point of view, external data is not available. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get an annual adjustment set before budgets are due.
Can I ask a question, Betsy?
Certainly, go ahead.
And this is from Mark. Mark, what specific guidance, like what number are the department heads with unions putting in, given that all those contracts are up this year?
So the departments are not putting anything in for the union increases, Jason. The way that this normally works is that when the successor agreements come before town meeting for their approval, there is a number for each of those, which contains all of the money items, so to speak, including any COLAs and things of that nature that are have been negotiated as part of that successor agreement for the first year. And then if that article is approved, then the town accountant then takes those increases and then puts everything into the respective departments line items.
And you have no timeline. Obviously, you have no idea how the unions are going to react to negotiation, but do you expect that those negotiations will be done before or after March town meeting?
My goal is always to have them completed prior to town meeting, and there's only been, I think, once or twice in my career where I've been unsuccessful in having them. I've always had the successor contracts in place before the existing one expires. So that's my goal. I think that there's going to be conversations to be starting on the at least the town side to begin to get our ducks in order for negotiations in the next several weeks.
So I guess, Betsy, with that, and Mark, this isn't going to surprise you. I really don't like that approach, but I understand why you do it, because you have to have a bargaining position. I'm more of a fan of putting a placeholder and putting something out there for departments to at least budget with the understanding that there's going to be a much more thorough budget, much more thorough discussion about what the appropriate number is. Maybe it's a percentage higher, maybe it's a percentage lower, but it's likely not zero. Especially, right, if we just all look at the prices we pay for normal consumer goods at this point. I think we need to be realistic that it's something greater than zero. So I would advocate, and I would be willing to motion this based on just how the discussion ensues, is that we put a placeholder. I'm going to throw out a number of 2%, just for departments to have a formula, and for Carla to have a formula in their spreadsheet. And we make the discussion very clear that it is merely a placeholder, and it could be as low as zero or a number higher, greater than 2%. But I think it then will create a situation where you're not going to have wild budget swings, and you're going to allow these departments to adequately present their budgets to advisory, BOS, and any other constituency with some semblance of reality, but not maybe rounded to the dollar. So I do think we need to provide a placeholder that is subject to obviously a significant amount of vetting and further discussion and data to support it.
I thought that Brian's memo did that he said to use the 2.8. Did I miss something, or did I?
No, Barry, you are correct. So on the second page of Mr. Ballantyne's memo, again, this isn't in the packet, I forwarded to you subsequently. Top of the second page, please note for SAP salaries, please use the FY22 approved rate of 2.8.
Yeah, and I think what I'm saying, and I guess what I'm saying is, I think we should affirm that that's whether it's 2.8, or some other number, that we should affirm that that's going to be the temporary placeholder, subject to further discussion and data.
Yeah, I understand. So thank you, Barry, for pointing that out. And I think, Jason, if I understand, you're saying make sure that we officially sanction that, because all the folks might not read that. We've made that decision just based on Brian's memo.
Well, I'm also confused as to why Carla was reaching out to you asking for that. Like, I'm just trying to understand the order of sequence, Mark. Did Carla reach out to Betsy before Brian put that statement in his memo?
So I'm trying to, let's clarify one piece of confusion I have first. So in your comments, Jason, are you talking about union or SAP?
I'm talking about SAP.
Okay.
Well, I don't agree with the union. What you do with the unions, that's not my prerogative to say. So I'm talking about specifically SAP. I know Barry read that statement, but I'm saying we should do the same thing, is I guess what I'm trying to say, which is why I drew the union into the discussion. Yeah.
Well, we can have a discussion about the union offline, but like I said, I'm glad. Thank you for clearing that up for me. So I can't give you the chicken or the egg in terms of Carla's call, but Brian, I mean, we had a conversation at the finance team level about the memo before it was going out. And normally what we do to ensure that everybody is carrying the same level of placeholder is for any salary increases. It's simply whatever the increase was the prior year. That way, everything is consistent, whether it's a 2, a 2.5, a 2.8, so that when this board decides to set an increase of, say it was 2.8 last year, at 2.5 next year, then we know we can go in and just make a similar change to each budget. Someone's not carrying a 2.8, someone's not carrying a 5, someone's not carrying a 3 type of thing. So it's more just to make sure we have a consistent baseline when people submit their budgets.
Thank you, Mr. Purple. Just to set the table, I was on vacation through October 3rd. I returned to town and started working on this packet on Monday, October 4th and Tuesday, October 5th. I sent an email to the team, to Ms. Hale, Mr. Ballantyne, Mr. Purple, saying leaves are falling from the trees, time to start thinking about the annual adjustment. Please provide the information you've provided before, and sending them the template on page 32. And Ms. McAuliffe reached out to me on Thursday, October 7th, 2 days later. And she said, I will read you her email. Hope you are well. I was wondering if the PB was open to voting the SAP increase prior to the date the budgets are due. If we know the percentage after the budgets are turned in and it's different from the assumption, then folks need to go in, rework their figures, and there's a bit of back and forth. Just thinking how we can eliminate confusion. Thanks, Carla. And I responded that date, great minds think alike. We're already working on it. In case you're not familiar, this is the process that the board has evolved into. And to be clear, when I started on the board, I think my first year, 2017, the only thing we looked at was Vanessa's survey of external comps. We looked and said, what are other towns doing for a raise? I don't think we looked inward at unions or manager contracts. And that was something that evolved over time, 2017, 2018, 2019. I got input from community members. Why isn't your board looking at what other employees are being paid? I got input from board members, so we evolved. So I understand we don't know the unions, but looking at the checklist on page 32 in the packet, Mark, do we have employee contract information? Do we know what managers are getting? Are they in a new contract era? Are we looking at old contracts? I know I have some contracts. Because one of the things the board likes to do is look at those contracts as well. So maybe if we don't have anything on the unions, and Jason, I'm not trying to pass off your concerns. I'm just wondering if we have any internal data on employee contracts that you could provide at this time.
So you do have a couple of changes. My new contract has been approved. It's in the process now of being executed, being signed. And once it's all signed, I'll make a copy of that available to personnel board. It'll be up on the website.
Okay, great.
Fire chief's contract, my contract is actually tied to the SAP. So any increases, whatever you vote for the SAP is whatever I'm eligible for as well.
Is that standard? That's not what it's been in the past.
No, that's what was done this time. That was something I requested.
Okay, so you will get the same raise, town administrator will get the same raise as SAP employees. No separate clause. Okay, good to know.
Fire chief's contract is coming up for renewal in, I believe it's April. And so there's going to, there would likely be some adjustment there. So I don't know what that increase is going to look like moving forward for fiscal 23. Police chief, I think, has another year. Miss Galligan has a little bit more. Mr. Ballantyne will be coming. So there will be some adjustments. I can go back and look at the dates and provide you, the expiration dates of the existing contracts and what impact, the impacts that we know of those contract employees for fiscal 23.
Thank you. So I don't think it's reasonable. I just sent this request out on October 5th. Mr. Ballantyne's on vacation. I did not have an expectation that this data would be available 1 week later today, but just more to get the ball rolling. So if it's the sense of the board that you want to set a placeholder today, I have no problem with that. And we'll table refining that number to the November meeting.
I guess I would be opposed to doing that because it puts us, this is part of the budget process, which is under the purview of the finance director. He's given people guidance on what figure they should use for budgeting purposes. It seems to me that's his job. We don't have a role, as far as I see it, in the budget process. And for us to arbitrarily say, we say you should use this number for budgeting purposes, to me makes no sense. That's not our job. I mean, ultimately, we have to decide what the actual number is, and people will plug that in. But I don't see us, and I don't think historically, at least as long as I've been involved, we haven't done that. We haven't insinuated ourselves into or put our imprimatur on some arbitrary figure that should or shouldn't be used for budgetary purposes. So I guess I'd be opposed to doing that.
I'm not suggesting to do anything arbitrary. I'm actually suggesting to support, you put further support behind Brian's memo.
But why?
2.8%.
But we're then saying we support that number.
No, we're supporting we're supporting the process that he's using to date, and to make it known that there's a significant, at least this is my personal view, amount of data that is still required to formalize that number. It could be a number lower, it could be a number higher. I certainly want to see a lot more data, and it's interesting, obviously, to hear that Mark's now tied to this number too, and how many others are going to be tied to it. Like, is that something that then gets negotiated with the unions potentially? I don't know.
But again, for me, Brian's the one who drives the budget process. We don't have any role in the budget process. So we're sort of jumping in. I'm not sure what authority if we say that the personnel board says you should use 2.8, people I think are going to say, okay, they've looked at data and they think it should be 2.8. Recognize we're also going to say that's not a final number. But to me, everybody knows that Brian drives the process. He's telling them use this number. I don't know why they then have to hear from us that we think you should use that number when we have no role in the budgetary process.
Well, I think Barry, I think we're saying the same thing. All I'm saying is we're not planning to interject ourselves and insert a different number at this time period, and it's still under review by the personnel board.
But I just don't see why we'd be voting.
I don't think we have to vote. I'm not wet on a
Okay.
vote.
Oh,
I'm not wet on a vote. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're on the same page. So
I mean, I read Brian's memo multiple times with two different hats on and thought it was well written. I just didn't know if Carla was looking. I'm confused by Carla's comments, right? Is Carla was looking for guidance, and I can understand why she's looking for guidance. I agree, it's great accounting. I just want to level set that at least me, from a voting perspective, I'm a long ways from being ready to vote on a number. And I think I'm hearing that from everyone else too. Like, it may not be November, Betsy. Like, I think is the key. Like, this may drag into the winter, right? Just see how the union stuff keeps going. I get, Mark, you're not going to probably be done until March, but my goal here is to create parity.
Just from my perspective, I have limited knowledge of all of these matters. I just know that I've been chair of this board for the last 3 years, and this is how we've done it. I don't find any inconsistency between Carla's request and Brian's memo, because Brian's memo says, for now, use the FY22 figure. And the second sentence is, as soon as the increase is officially established, we will advise departments. So what I hear Carla saying is, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we knew that number? Well, it seemed to be a pretty common sense request. I wouldn't read more into it. And it came out the day after Brian's memo. So I think everybody's just trying to do the right thing with as much information as they can.
So can we get a drop dead?
I can't believe I'm going to say I disagree in some respect with my esteemed colleague, Mr. Rubenstein. This is the first time I've ever done that. We do have somewhat of a role, although it's been a little twisted. I would draw your attention to 16F of the bylaw. Not later than 6 months prior to annual town meeting, personnel board may vote an annual adjustment, but shall reserve the right to vote no adjustment to the classification schedule and establish the effective rate for employees of each grade for the next fiscal year, subject to ratification at the formal amendment of the salary mission plan at the town meeting. So this setting of the annual adjustment is a interpretation of 16F. So to the extent Barry says we don't have a role in the budget, he is correct, but we do have a legislative responsibility to set an annual adjustment, although the setting of it and the way that we do it is not exactly what it says in the bylaw. It's a tradition and a custom that I inherited. I didn't understand it a decade ago when I was a library trustee, and we would get this order on high from the someone called the personnel board, and I said, I don't understand it. We're supposed to set salaries at the library for salary employees, except the union ones. But 16F is the starting point for the discussion of our role. So I just wanted to say that. Interpret it as,
it's just unclear to me what you're disagreeing with that what I said. I think I acknowledged it's our job to set the annual adjustment.
but well, that's our role, is to take in this data. I don't think Brian sets, I don't think the finance director sets the number. I think we do.
We set the ultimate number. Brian
Okay.
can set whatever number he wants for their budgeting purposes.
Oh, I got it. Fair enough.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think we agree.
okay. to the extent I thought I disagreed with Barry, it was because I wasn't smart enough to understand his comment, and I retract my disagreement. All right. So if I sense the board, I haven't heard from Mr. Nixon, we're going to let it stay where it is, particularly because we do not have any input from Mr. Ballantyne on CPI, you know, what it would cost. One of the things Mr. Ballantyne always tells us is what is the cost of a 1%, 2%, 3% increase. I have no reason to deviate from, whether it's my role to do so or not, I personally have no reason to deviate from Brian's guidance. My placeholder would be 2.8. If Brian had called me and said, hey, I am sending out a memo before your meeting, you're the chair of personnel board, what do I put in as a placeholder? I would say 2.8 like last year.
I agree.
All right.
Absolutely.
Betsy, two quick follow-up. I think we're all on the same page on that.
Sure.
Based on the paragraph you just read to Barry, are we already deficient in our role as the personnel board? Because is this one of the unintended consequences of a March town meeting? That was probably written when you had a May town meeting or a late April town meeting.
I have stumbled with annual adjustment every year since I've been on the board.
Okay. So I guess the question is, do we have a drop dead deadline? And this may be a take back from Mark to Brian of when we really need to provide guidance.
And just to add, Jason, we have started debating the annual adjustment in September every year that I've been on the board. And I think we set one as late as February one year, if it wasn't last year, the year before, because data kept rolling. Vanessa, does that sound familiar? Like we set one and then we played with it? Does that ring a bell?
It does, because the governor, you know, always comes to the MMA annual meeting in mid-January, and that's the first day he unveils his budget, or sometime that week. So, you know, it's we talk about it this time of year, but it's always very hard to come to a final decision, you know, before early winter.
Or maybe I might be mistaken. I know we changed our budget in January one year. Maybe it wasn't the annual adjustment. I'll have to do a memo on that.
It evolves, as you said, a lot every year.
Now that I think about it, it may have been that we reconsidered the personnel board budget into the new year. I can't say if we reconsidered an annual adjustment into the new year.
And what happens in past years, on some occasions, you know, Brian or the town accountant of the time will go into those spreadsheets and just adjust it themselves, you know, or, you know, it might be done through the department submitting a revised budget, but that can get confusing too. So it's not a consistent process.
All right, so let's wrap this because we do need to get to our budget, which is our responsibility as well. And then we just want to check back on our pending list to make sure we're all on the same page. So if I understand, it's the sense of the board that we are not going to take any votes at this time, and that we look forward to receiving information requested on page 32 and having a conversation with Mr. Ballantyne at our November meeting.
Right.
Sounds good?
Yes.
All right. Thank you all. And then moving on to the last official item on new business is the personnel board budget. So again, I had put something together for you before I got Brian's email. I don't know why his email is dated the 6th, but maybe I didn't see it until after, because I filed the packet on the 7th. All right. So page 33 of your packet is a budget that I put together. And then subsequently I got Brian's and they do match. That's the good news. So whether you're looking at the official Town of Southborough Excel budget that came in Mr. Ballantyne's packet, or the one that I put in that came in his packet of documents that was not in the board packet, or you can look at the one I put in the board packet at page 33. This gives you a little sense of where we've been for the last few years and where we are now. One note I had, but I didn't have it keyed to a particular Excel line item. And that is on line 53020, consulting and professional services. Our existing budget is 5,000. I proposed a reduction of 50% to 2,500. So that note there about reduced line item, that's for this year. This is something we had discussed last year. We have an applicant tracking system. It's was $3,500. I think you can see it under FY 2020 actual. Oh, it's 3,600 now. 3,599 is an applicant tracking system, and that's used by Town Hall for hiring. And Mr. Rubenstein brought up a great point when we were discussing the budget last year. I think we actually froze this line item during the pandemic with the thought that we weren't going to be doing a lot of hiring. But moving forward, Mr. Rubenstein questioned why the applicant tracking system would be in the personnel board budget. And Mr. Purple said there would be no problem to take it out. So that reflects some of that. And I don't know if that's something, Mr. Purple, that you've accounted for. So I wanted to make sure that was still okay with you, Mark. That's
No, I'm still fine with that.
okay, great. Thanks very much. So you can see our line item on management and consulting bounces around depending on whether we're a quadrennial review year. That's our obligation to review all the salary schedules, et cetera, every 4 years, so-called quadrennial review. We are not in a quadrennial review year. We do have an outstanding matter of the MEPA review. So budget kind of leads in back to my to-do list. You may recall when we were talking about doing our quadrennial review of salaries and schedules, we decided to roll an equal pay analysis into it. That was the MEPA review. And we agreed it would be a combination of town employees submitting data to the attorney. That was Attorney Norris, and he would do an analysis under MEPA. And I don't have to go back through the whole thing. It's all in the minutes if you want to review. We did get a legal opinion from Mr. Norris's office. The board expressed concerns about that opinion, and that matter is on page 8, Bates 8 of my list of pending items, MEPA review. You may recall there are issues, and we were going to work on a road. Mr. Purple was going to work. The minutes reflect Mr. Purple was going to work on a roadmap for how we moved forward on this because there were issues with the MEPA review. So how does this pertain to budget? We may not be done if we want to move with in a different direction on the MEPA review. There may be additional legal fees. To my knowledge, we never paid a bill to the Norris firm for the MEPA opinion. There was an earlier opinion on benefits. You may recall when we started our Section 11 inquiry, we got a legal opinion from the Norris firm about benefits, and that was paid. So there could be, may want to go back and increase your consulting and professional services line item if you think you want to take another whack at a MEPA review with the new law firm, or if you just want to let it lay. We've never discussed Attorney Norris's opinion, the substance of it in public, because we never figured out how to have that discussion. So if that isn't confusing enough, basically the legal opinion is about whether or not there's an issue with our salaries. We have to figure out how to have that conversation before we have a conversation about whether or not we need to put more consulting dollars into our budget.
Is it all legal fees or is it fees outside of legal?
So in the past, Jason, for the quadrennial review, I think we had the consultant who was an attorney as part of it. The feeling was now that we have this new classification system and we followed up with a study that actually went on for a couple years of the part-time salaries, that we didn't need to continue to pay GovHR. And what we came up with for a salary review is we have very competent professionals in Mr. Ballantyne's office who can pull together what we pay folks and that could be sent to town legal counsel to review. So I think there was a feeling on the part of the board that we didn't need to have consulting fees for an HR consultant unless and until we decided we wanted to change our classification system. And it's pretty new. When I came on the board, our classification system was 2015, so it's still relatively new. So the big study, I think it was about $25,000 we paid the consultant before my time, but it was 2015, and subsequently paid her a few $1,000s to do a study of the Part C, the part-time. So there was a feeling, doesn't mean someone can't propose that we need to look at something, but for now it's pretty much been these legal questions.
So I guess my question is why wouldn't the legal questions, leaving the consulting off to the side for a second, why wouldn't the legal questions, and this maybe from Mark, be covered by the special labor council budget? Or is it sometimes, and this is just maybe supplemental?
I just know that we had the money in our consulting budget to hire a consultant to do our quadrennial review. And so I think it was Vanessa and Mark stepped forward and said, hey, we can do the research and numbers.
No, leave
on our end.
quadrennial off to the side. I'm
Okay.
asking about the 2,500 for this year.
Okay.
Is that to deal with one-off questions that we may have for Labor Council? Or is that maybe for other type of unanticipated type consulting expenses that we may need to undertake?
I think one area that to your answer your question, I'll just throw my opinion out there, Jason. I think it could be part legal analysis at some point during the year on that, but it also could be, for example, Joellen helped the chair and I review some material recently. She didn't charge us for that. If we did any further analysis, we would pay her out of that line item, in my opinion. So it's a combination of different things that could come from that amount.
Yeah, to Vanessa's point, it's been less consulting the last couple of years, but it is available for consulting. And she's absolutely right. We called upon Joellen to be the tiebreaker when we were grading the IT position because we couldn't come to agreement.
And theoretically could have gotten a bill for it, but you didn't.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for scoring a position, she charges a couple $100.
Yeah. So my recommendation, Betsy, is if you have to submit a request in and around the time of our next meeting, I would be that you level fund the budget. And if after further discussion of the MEPA review or other items at a later hour, you decide to reduce it, no one's going to argue with you. Right. Right. But if we go back and say, we have this MEPA issue and people then want to talk about it, it then just creates a lot of discussion that you probably could have avoided. So I would recommend level funding, which is candidly a win in most departments. And if, as we further discuss MEPA or anything else, we decide that we're still overfunded, we all pay this as taxpayers, we'll gladly go in with a reduction closer to town meeting. But I would suggest you level fund your initial submission to the treasurer.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Malinowski. Mr. Nixon, Mr. Rubenstein?
I agree with Jason on that.
Me too.
All right. So I would ask for a vote. If I understand correctly, Mr. Purple, you can tell me if I'm wrong. Mr. Ballantyne is expecting a budget to be submitted by November 12th. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And our next meeting is scheduled for the 17th. So looking at Bates 33, I'm going to put 5,000 back in to line item 53020. That will make it level funded. So I will entertain a motion from the board. I will entertain a motion to submit a personnel board budget for fiscal year 2023 in the amount of $13,350 in the form submitted for FY 2022.
So move.
Second.
All right, this will be a roll call vote. Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Nixon,
Yes,
Mr. Rubenstein,
yes,
and the chair votes in the affirmative. Great, I will do that, and I'll have it in the packet for the next meeting. All right. So the last thing I have on my list is just to go back and make sure we hit everything on the pending. Starting on page 7, annual adjustment is done. Oh, the next item is an annual joint meeting with the BOS. So this is something that the board has done every year since I've been chair, that I requested. I think I've kind of run my course on those meetings. Is there anybody else who feels strongly about scheduling a joint meeting? The alternative is to let the Board of Selectmen come to us. I know they have a policy of trying to get to as many boards and committees as possible. I don't feel after 4 years that there's utility for me in pressing for such a meeting at this time. And I open it up to the board if they wish to proceed with that. Some of you have attended those meetings.
I would suggest that we not push for a meeting now, but we don't table this all together for this year. I do think there are benefits of appearing before the board and letting them, making it more informational, if that's what it ends up being. Or, you know, I think we have some items we're going to be dealing with that may impact the warrant that they ultimately are going to take a position on for annual town meetings. So I would let some of these items, you know, get advanced a little further and potentially think about, you know, a late winter, early spring sort of discussion. But I do think there is still value in providing an update of what we're up to, even if there are no significant asks of the board at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Just a little coda on that. When we met with them last year and the year before, I know at least last year, we presented to them the list of factors that we consider in setting the annual adjustment. And the sense of the Board of Selectmen was those factors made sense to them. And we didn't get any feedback on changing our approach. So I proceed from that perspective. But your perspective is very valuable. Thank you. So the minutes will reflect that we're not requesting at this time. But it's always open to us to request it. All right, benefits review section 11. We have a path forward. We discussed that today. Thank you very much. Benefits sick leave, that will be forthcoming. Thank you. Budget for personnel board, we took care of. Thank you very much. And the applicant tracking system is all set. It's going to go into a different budget. Hiring is still a pending item. We discussed that today. No further action for the board at this time. On to page 8. The hiring letter, we discussed that today. No further action for the board at this time. Option is left open with the sense of the board that if the offer comes to me, I will then distribute it to the board with appropriate safeguards. So that option is open to Ms. Hale and Mr. Purple to send it to the chair instead of to the full board. Or if they opt to send the hiring letter to the full board, the draft of the hiring letter to the full board, the board is aware that they don't hit reply all. They just let the chair know if there's an issue. All right, hiring process document, we discussed that. That's in the works. Job description for the executive assistant to the BOS, we discussed that. And there is no further action for the board at this time. MIPA review, that is in Mr. Purple's court. I don't know, Mark, if you maybe want to discuss that offline. We can discuss if you've made any progress on the roadmap. I know you're a really busy guy, but the board is not going to take any action on that at this time. Page 9, which is page 3 of my memo. Performance evaluation certificate. We discussed that today and we have a path forward. Thank you. Policy and guidance on new positions. We did not take any action on this. We did not discuss this today. This is the document that I had put in front of you about giving guidance to folks on what factors we consider when we look at new positions. the board was split on whether or not it was going to consider economic factors. We did not discuss this today. I could put that back on the agenda for November, because that matter is still pending. And lastly, town org chart. We discussed that today. There is nothing for the board to do at this time. We have not received any further communications since August, and we are ready to review that when we get a draft from Mr. Purple's office. That is everything that I have for you folks. Anybody have any other business that has come before them in the last 48 hours? I have nothing. Lastly, board calendar. We scheduled a meeting previously for Wednesday, November 17th at noon. Would you like to schedule the December meeting now while we are all together?
Sure.
All right. What looks good to folks? If we go 1 month, we'll be a little off our second. Traditionally, it's been second Wednesday of the month, but whereas we are meeting on November 17th, we could meet the third Wednesday, which is December 15th. We could also push it back and meet on December 8th, which would be 3 weeks. Sense of the board, what works for you?
15.
Indifferent.
Either works for me. So.
All right. Shall we say December 15th, squarely in the middle of the month? Vanessa, how does that work for you?
That would be fine. I
Okay,
can take care of the Zoom reservations.
great. Thank you so much. All right. Personnel Board has scheduled a meeting for Wednesday, December 15th via Zoom at 12 p.m. Thanks, everybody.
Madam Chair, I just didn't know if you thought the moderator was looking for any attention. He has been here the whole time.
Paul, Mr. Sabino is not a shy guy. If he wanted to raise
Okay.
his hand, I'm sure he could.
I agree. I just wanted to point that out.
Great, thank you very much. If you want to bring him over, if he'd like to address us, I figured he would raise his hand if he needed to speak to
Certainly
us.
will.
He's not known for being a shy guy, but sure, bring him over. Let's say hello before we adjourn.
If he is in fact still watching.
I figured he was just
Cannot
checking
say.
out, make sure we were doing our
Okay,
job.
all right. I'm good then.
Is he here? Does he want to speak?
He has not unmuted, so perhaps he walked away from his computer.
Okay, then. Well, he knows where to find us if
Yes,
he needs us.
okay.
All right,
Hey,
thanks.
sorry,
Oh, wait a minute, there he is.
Hey,
I know,
Paul.
I know where to find you. I just don't know where the mute button is.
Welcome, boss. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see everybody. I have been enjoying the last couple of hours. I don't need any attention. The only thing some time back, you had a couple of town meeting items that you went through. The only other thing I'd add to that is that tentatively, the usual pre-town meeting that I hold is scheduled for Monday night, the 25th. So, Betsy, I heard your explanation of how you intend to introduce the article and then maybe, pass it off to whoever may need to answer substantive questions to the extent there are any. But if somebody could attend my pre-town meeting on the 25th, I'd be much obliged. You'll be getting an invitation from the clerk to that. I'm intending to start it at 6:30 on Monday, the 25th.
Mr. Moderator, will you be in person or Zoom?
That'll be a Zoom.
Zoom. All right. I am happy to attend as a presenter of the warrant article on behalf of the Personnel Board.
Super.
I
So,
look
Vanessa,
forward to it.
was there anything else you thought I needed to?
No, I just wanted to make sure see if you had any questions since you had been here very loyally for the last 2 hours.
Yes, indeed. Half of that I was driving.
Okay.
So I like the Zoom sometimes. But anyway, no, I'm good. I'm good at that
Okay.
at this point.
All right. It's nice to see you. Always welcome. We love visitors. All right.
Excellent. Excellent. Cheers.
Thank you. Good to see you, Paul. Thanks very much. All right, folks, if nobody has anything else, I'll see you back here on November 17th. And we are adjourned at 2:17 p.m.
Stay well, everybody.